Hey family, this is Pastor Mike.
And this is Pastor Heaven, and welcome to Empowering Conversations that Act.
Awaken the conscience today. These conversations that we do are designed to educate, empower, and engage in this season. This is a season of so much heightened political awareness, social, cultural awareness, and we just want to make sure that we have conversations that inform us of what is at stake, not just in this election season, but what's at stake culturally and in our community. And so we are grateful for that. And as always, I always remind everybody, we're mindful of time. You know, everybody has Zoom fatigue and are weary of looking at computers all day, but we just want to make sure that we really allow you to eavesdrop on the kind of conversations that myself and Pastor Heaven have regarding politics, social events, cultural issues that emerge. And so we're going to get right into it tonight. And we're going to start something different tonight than we did it last week. And then next week, we'll do something different. And on election night, we'll do something else different. But tonight, we're going to start with hot topics as part of our Empowering Conversation series. And one of the things we have to prepare ourselves for, Pastor Heaven, is tonight is the final presidential debate. I've been excited.
Are you? You're excited? You sure?
I am excited. I've been excited about this. I'm ready for it for a lot of reasons. I think, you know, the second one was canceled due to the president having COVID. And the first one, as we said last week, was an absolute embarrassment. I don't know if I expected more to come from it. Or was I hopeful that more would come from it? But it ended up being just we thought when you think about who's the president right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I had texted you while we were watching the last presidential debate. And I mean, it was by far definitely one of the worst debates I've ever witnessed. I mean, at first it was comical. You know, you had a moment you were laughing, and then at a second you had to take a step back and you realized that these two individuals would be potentially running the free world, running the greatest, one of the most powerful countries in the world. And to see that we could not even, as constituents, get a clear answer on issues that are concerning our particular world at this moment. So yes, for a second, you know, Trump can be a little bit, you know, comical. It can be a little bit, but then for a second, you're just like, this is actually extremely tragic, and it's sad for our democracy. And to be honest, I know that they said that there's going to be a mute button tonight. I feel like that mute button might not work.
Or he'll talk over the mute button, right?
He'll just keep talking, and somebody will just have to keep muting him. But you know, I think for this particular debate, there are a couple topics that I think that they're going to have to hit on. That I think the American people are really sort of. I mean, I don't think there are many people wavering on their decision. I think at this point, most people have made their decision as to who they're going to vote for.
I agree.
You know, or if they're going to vote. Unfortunately, there are some people that are going to be out. That's a whole nother issue. But definitely, I think COVID, as we're going into the winter surge, what is both their individual plans on ensuring the safety? Now we're in a position where we understand and we have a lot of knowledge about COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So we should not be making the same mistakes that we made going into the winter months. But what's your plan? What's your actual plan? I think them answering that it's going to be huge. It's going to be a huge topic conversation.
Well, you know, in terms of the president, that question, what's your plan, can apply to most of the things that we're dealing with now. I mean, what is your plan with COVID? What is your plan with regard to, we know he wants to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, AKA Obamacare.
Right.
But we don't know what his plan is. He says that to take care of people with pre-existing conditions, but we don't know what the plan is. And to me, that's amazing. Something that can impact so many countless people in this country, countless millions of people in this country, to be committed to wiping it out for no other reason than just to undo what President Obama did.
Yeah.
And then have countless people in the country suffering without health care is tragic. And, you know, so tonight is going to be interesting, and we'll see what happens.
Is there something you're looking forward to, or any information that you're looking forward to hearing from the candidate?
I think I'm a Democrat, so I'm biased. I want Joe Biden, and I want him to be mindful. I want him, as some commentators have said today, to be a little bit more offensive.
Yeah.
In terms of attacking Trump, because we know Trump is going to be attacking, not get into a verbal jousting match, but to just be clear about what are the issues, hold him accountable, right? And I want him to lay out some of the plan. I think from Trump, anything other than cutting the Vice President Joe Biden off, I think we want to just hear him say something around issues, around policy, and not make up things, right? So we'll see tonight. That's tonight. I'm sure everyone will tune in to the debate on tonight. But I want to look at Pastor Heaven, some of your hot topics on tonight. And
so I got some hot topics for us to discuss tonight. So and these are really based on two different articles that I had a chance to read during this week that really kind of stuck out to me, that I think are kind of conversations that we're having amongst ourselves. And the first one was an article that was in the Atlantic, and the article was entitled "Should the Professional Be Political?" And essentially this article was really based around Brian Armstrong, who is the CEO of Coinbase, which is a cryptocurrency company out in Silicon Valley. And he made a decision recently to sort of an overall sort of rule within the company that they would be what many would consider apolitical. Making a decision that essentially Coinbase would no longer be making political statements. And this was really in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, when a lot of companies we saw, especially Nike, a lot of companies were coming out and making statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so essentially what Brian Armstrong is making the case is it the employer and an employment's position in place to sort of come in and participate in, the social justice issues of this time? He did say in the article was that his company would be committed to cryptocurrency, social equity around that issue, but that they wouldn't be expanding beyond that, and that it wasn't necessarily their place to sort of kind of be in those conversations. And I thought it was a really interesting point, because he offered up to the people in the company the option to leave, and 60 employees did leave. So that's 5% of the
So they left, and those 6 employees left because
of the new policy. And essentially was like, if you could not abide or move forward and implement this policy, you had the option to leave and receive 4 to 6 months of severance. And so 60 employees chose to leave because for them, it was important that their company be politically engaged and socially engaged in social issues. And so it brings up a big question, and I'm going to put it on to you, which is really the main question is, one, should a company be making a BLM statement, which we've talked about vigorously in our conversations, and whether a company should be really permitting and encouraging their employees and the company itself, the institution, to becoming politically engaged. And should companies be doing that? Are they required to do that? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts, Pastor Mike.
Yeah, I mean, my suspicion with regard to institutions that came out when everything started around the movement again was that it became in some ways an easy way for many companies to what I don't want to say feign commitment, but in some ways it was. If you say, okay, we support Black Lives Matter, I mean, there were tons of companies that were putting commercials up, we support Black Lives, and we support BLM, and it was happening. People were making investments. But to me, if you didn't just simply verbalize commitment or pay for a commercial, but there's no institutional shift in policy and how you create space for people of color in your organization, that's just lip service to me. And many people were getting a pass because all they had to do is either have a banner, wear a shirt, put up an ad, take out an ad, say we support Black lives, and some got a pass, and there was no institutional commitment. So that part I get. And I'm with some of the people in the company. I don't think a company can force employees to be politically engaged. I think that is kind of ridiculous. I mean, there's no like kind of testing for employment with regard to social justice. But I do think it becomes a responsibility of the institution to create mechanisms to ensure equity and fairness with regard to hiring practices, with regard to policies, not just people of color, but women and on and on. So I think that has to be something we have to talk about more, because that was frustrating to me, where there were companies who would say Black Lives Matter, we support Black lives, but they were making no shifts in their policy and in the way they even engage in hiring. So, I get it. But that was the first hot topic, huh?
That was my first hot topic, and I'm in an agreement with you. And I just want to add, I think there are two key assumptions that are being had, which is what does political activism look like for a company, right? So he clearly stated in the article, which was important, I thought was powerful, was that he said social change happens when you are committed to an issue for a decade or more, and that you have individuals coming around focusing on this one particular issue. And he said, it's not our place to be engaged in something that's outside of our scope of our conversation. Like, we do cryptocurrency, we're around, financial equity and creating a place where people have an economy where everybody has. So he's like, that's our place. That's where we want to work. I don't want to focus on these other issues. So I think, to your point, companies should not just be making lip service, but really changing policies within the company and within the work that they do. You don't need to go out and change police brutality. You need to focus in your lane, stay in your lane. That's my perspective, stay in your lane.
Well, I'm gonna add, you're right. And you just said it beautifully. I think, should everybody be out there on the front line protesting? And maybe not, everybody won't, but where you are, where can you impact and affect change? I think that becomes critical. And I think we're in a moment where we've become so accustomed to shallow engagement that we let the shallow engagement pass for substantive engagement, right? And so I think that is something. All right, hot topic number 2 for Pastor Heaven. What's the next one?
Number 2 is a Washington Post recently put out an article. Actually, several different agencies put out, news outlets put out an article in regards to a decision that was made by a federal judge, which pretty much strike down a rule that the Trump administration was getting ready to put in regarding SNAP. Now, for those of you guys that are not familiar with SNAP, SNAP is the acronym is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So for individuals in our country who may be finding themselves on hard times, can apply for this program to meet their food security needs. And so essentially, there was this particular rule that said that you could not be on, they were trying to implement this rule that said that you could not be on SNAP for longer than 3 months at a time within a 3-year span. So essentially, and right now, think about it, in the middle of this pandemic, if you are someone who had lost your job, you could only be on SNAP for 3 months. And after that, you would essentially be kicked off, especially if you were somebody that did not have dependents. And particularly during this time, we have a lot of people in our country who are not working and are single. They don't have children, but they're not working, and they are in need. They have needs that the government needs to be meeting. And so essentially, this rule, the only way that a country or a state or a city, they could get a waiver to essentially supersede this rule. But this particular rule that the Trump administration wanted to put in had said that you needed 6% unemployment within your city or in your state or in your county to get this waiver. Before, you could get this waiver no matter the unemployment numbers. But essentially, they were saying that you needed 6% unemployment within your county to get this waiver so that people could stay on SNAP longer.
Wow. And the court said what?
And the courts gutted it and said that in a time like this, they literally said that it was a human decency issue. That in a time during the pandemic, those are the words, a human decency issue. That a time during the pandemic, that a rule like this that would have been implemented I believe at the end of October, would have gutted over 700,000 people, actually probably even more, because when they inquired from the Department of Agriculture, what was the actual number of people that would lose SNAP benefits, they couldn't say. And I think a reason why they couldn't say, because they were embarrassed, and they knew that the potential for this rule to be implemented would essentially just take off thousands, hundreds, and millions of people off of SNAP. And this is, I want to add this as a fact, between 2000 and now, it was at one point 17 million people that had SNAP. Right now, it's over 36 million people. So just imagine 36 million people. Of that 36 million, millions of people would have been impacted had this legislation or this rule been passed.
Now this is why we have these conversations, because you see, this was not getting headlines.
It's not getting headlines.
We talked about, but this is another moment where we get so fixated on sometimes the distracting nature of the president. He's the master. Well, he's not just the master of distraction. He is the distraction. Fixated on him. That what if this would have passed? What if the courts would let this pass? All of a sudden, there would have been people who would have lost their benefits, whose families have been struggling, singles who don't have jobs have been struggling. It would have happened. There would have been no protests, no marches about it. It would have just happened because we were fixated on Trump, the distraction, and the distracting nature of this current political moment. So no, this is exactly why we have these talks, because just imagine, and look at what the court said. It was a human decency issue.
Human decency. And there were about 17, I think it's about maybe between 9 or 10 different states. And New York City was one of the states that was on this case that was suing the Department of Agriculture. And so this would have impacted, and I'm pretty sure that New York State knew that this was going to devastate the city. Devastate the city had a rule like this been in place. And there were actually other rules as well. And in those rules, they said over 3.7 million people would have been taken off every single month had these other additional rules been put in place. 3.7 million people on average a month would have been gutted and taken out of the SNAP program.
And there are potentially people who have been taken out of the program who had no knowledge of what was going on.
No knowledge.
Even understood. So think about this. The courts have to say it was a human decency issue, because the problem is we don't have a decent human running this country right now. And that is the issue.
And when we know that the majority of people that are benefiting from this are actually not Black people, it's white people, which are a good majority of Trump's base. And so a lot of these people who would have been impacted are Trump supporters.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
that's not surprising, because what we know is that there are many. I always refer to, I think it was a Jimmy Kimmel or a Jimmy Fallon episode, years ago when President Obama was in office. And they went to people, and they went to specifically to white people. And they said, do you believe in Obamacare? They were like, oh, absolutely not. And then they would say, well, do you believe in the Affordable Care Act? Yes, we support that. I mean, they were so anti-Obama that it seemed like insanity. And there were people who voted for Trump, and he was saying that he was going to pull back Affordable Care Act. There are people who voted for Trump, voting against their interests, voting against their own benefits for the sake of saying, well, I believe what he's saying. Well, he's saying he's going to take your benefits, and he's saying that he doesn't care about people who are poor in this country. And what you really was saying is that we support Trump because he's pro-white. He supports the nationalist causes. I mean, you go on and on with that. So that's good. Well, I like those hot topics. Well, I have a couple. I got a couple of hot topics. So just a couple. And we'll get into some other conversation. But yesterday, President Barack Hussein Obama spoke in Philadelphia. I happened to be in Philadelphia yesterday. I had to speak there last night. And he did what was unprecedented for him. He verbally gutted President Trump. And the things he was saying were real. I mean, take for instance, he said that President Trump wants to take credit for an economy he inherited, but doesn't want to take blame for a pandemic he could have prevented. Right? And he said, he had hoped. He knew that he knew Joe Biden and Trump, and they both sat with him, and he said in the Oval Office, and he knew that Trump would not continue his policies, but he had hoped that he would at least honor the position, care about the position, bring some level of dignity to the position. And he has not done that. And he began to rattle off so many things. We have a president who gives in, who panders to conspiracy theorists, who won't outrightly denounce white supremacy and white supremacist organizations. He said, think about what we're talking about. He said, every day we're talking about something crazy that the current president has tweeted or has said, right? And he says, this, that we were better 4 years ago than we are now, right? You don't have to like, and this is the thing, for the sake of hatred, there are people who will be anti-Obama and will put their intelligence on hold in the face of the insanity that we see played out before us every day by this current president, right? And Barack Obama went on the offensive hard yesterday. I mean, hard, but it had to be done, because what he said is that we have a president who literally makes things up as he goes along. It is clear he doesn't read policy briefings. He doesn't read, forget about foreign policy. He doesn't really have a grasp of domestic policy. He just doesn't read. And then many people know me. My biggest thing is that folk do not read. We don't read. We don't look at the small print. We don't understand what's going on. But this man is the lead, as you said, of the free world. But let me just say, I like what you said earlier, one of the most powerful countries. Because right now, because of this president, our status in the world, our global status is dropped. And in many ways has deteriorated and almost disappeared. And as one Republican general who endorsed Joe Biden, General McChrystal, he said that if Donald Trump is and he's a Republican, he said if Donald Trump is reelected and gets another 4 years, he said that America will be alone in this world without allies. Just think about that. Vulnerable without allies. And so to me, that is, I mean, what Obama did yesterday was just necessary. It was him coming out. So there was a line in there. I think you and I talked about it earlier. He said it just came out that President Trump had a secret bank account in China. And President Obama said, can you imagine what would have happened in my reelection if they found out I had a secret bank account in China? He said Fox News would still be talking about it. He said they would be calling him Beijing Barry. that just killed me. But he's right. I mean, the things that some people in media let this man pass with, they would have never let Barack Obama get away with. And so the blatant hypocrisy, not just of right-wing media, but of right-wing evangelicals and right-wing conservatives is on display. What do you think about what the president said yesterday?
Did you just see what he said? What the president said yesterday? I know you're still holding on to the belief that he's still our current president.
He's my president.
He's your forever president. Just the Lord.
He's just not in position.
You know, I say this a lot, but sometimes you forget, you know, because Obama has been gone for so long, just how phenomenal of an orator he truly is. And I really pray that the campaign uses him more. Yeah. Because what we saw yesterday and what he was able to do was, one, make a damning critique of our current administration, and yet still also inspire a sense of hope. Like I literally, after listening to him, I was like, I need to go to Virginia and vote like today. Like, wait, I need to make sure, you know. And so, you know, he has.
Don't tell anybody you didn't change your registration on national platforms. All right, go ahead.
It's fine. But yeah, no, it's just one. I had to take a moment and sit back and just realize just how a phenomenal speaker he really is in that moment, and what a powerful and a historical moment that was for a sitting president or a former president to make that big of a critique against a current president.
Yeah.
You know, the way that he did it. And I think the most powerful part of his speech, and I can't remember it verbatim, which was when he named all the individuals that Trump had appointed to these different departments. Mm-hmm. And each person had a conflict of interest. They were somehow involved or engaged in that industry and could somehow benefit had they shifted the pendulum or made policy decisions. And they have. I can't imagine the amount of the amount of ethical, or unethical decisions, the amount of corruption that has happened in the Trump administration that we are not even aware about. When he made that decision and named off each individual and named the agency or the industry that they were involved in that would put them in direct conflict to the work that they do. Yeah. And he said that Biden and Harris would surround themselves with individuals that wouldn't make these mistakes, that wouldn't be crooks, that wouldn't be people who were trying to support this capitalist industry. And it made me think about, you know, we always, once again, focus on Trump, but Trump has the power. The president has the power to appoint individuals.
Yeah.
And I think about your position and even the position of power that you have here at FCBC. If you came in and said, you know what, I'm just going to hire all of my friends to do this work, and each person is just going to take a paycheck, but each person can somehow benefit from this place of employment, and we're not going to care about the community. We're just going to continue to take FCBC tithes, and we're going to say we're going to say that we're going to do something, but you're not actually doing something. That is essentially what is happening. This man has put his friends in office so that they could financially benefit.
Well, hold on for a second. Hold that thought, because you gave a scenario. If I had done that in the Baptist church, what we do, we would vote the pastor out. Well, the way we would vote a pastor out, we could vote a president out, right? Because think about this. He has benefited himself. Trump has benefited from the decisions. And the reality is he has spent the last several days trying to distract us away from the debate, talking about the corruption of Biden and Barack Obama, when he has become a bastion of corruption in the White House right now. Those around him, the appointments that you just said he's been making, the decisions he's been making to benefit his friends, his family, billionaires. I mean, these are the people he is working for. He's not working, for those who you can hardly say middle class now, because the middle class has been so eroded. You either have the haves and the have-nots, those who are striving and those who are struggling. And so, he has been clear about who he wants to benefit. His tax plan has benefited the wealthy and put the burden on the people who can least afford the burden of unnecessary and heavy taxes. And on top of that, this man, it has come out, we saw it a few weeks ago, is only paid in certain years $750. Think about that. You have people who work.
I pay more than that in a month.
Listen, you have people who work retail, fast food industry, who pay more taxes than this man who claims to be a billionaire. So I think that was interesting. I think, again, it's another unprecedented moment. We have a president critiquing a sitting president, but we're in an unprecedented time that necessitates that kind of engagement, right? The next thing I wanted to talk about is something critical. Now, one of the platforms for President Trump when he ran for office was this kind of, xenophobic, nationalist appeal of, reducing the amount of illegal immigrants in the country. And they put a policy of zero tolerance to deter migrant families from coming. And then we saw the policy was separating what? Children from their parents at the border. You saw people in cages, children in cages. And around 2018, the policy faded because it came under such attack. The problem was the policy faded, right? But the impact didn't. So it faded away. And we know in our country, one of the things I critique the most is that we base our knowledge on the media spin cycle. So if the media no longer covers it or doesn't cover it, we don't do due diligence to find out or investigate, right? So when you started with the information about the SNAP program, we don't always do the due diligence to find out. But so when it faded away from the media, when it was no longer, beneficial for ratings to show children in cages or children in sick or parents separated from their children, it fell off the spin cycle. But this past week, it was discovered and revealed in court documents that there are 545 children, migrant children, who are separated from their parents and their parents cannot be found. I want you to think about that. When you talk about human decency, the fact that there are 545 children who have been orphaned by the United States, who have been made orphans. There's a woman named Dora Malara, I think her name was Dora Malara. Yeah, Dora Malara. They had a piece on her in I think CNN, because she's one of these people who tries to find parents of children who've been hurt through this process. And she talked about the pain it takes to try to locate parents who don't have any documentation, who basing it on word of mouth. If it was, I heard Michael was in this village, in this town, because many of the parents of these children are in Central America, right? And so you have 545 children that this country has made orphans because of these evil, inhumane policies ushered in by this human who's not decent. Think about that. 545 children right now have no idea where their parents are and may never see their parents again because they wanted to come to this country to find a better opportunity. And it's what Jesus said, When a person comes at your door looking for bread, you don't give them stones.
Yeah.
Right? This country says, send me that Statue of Liberty here in New York Harbor. Send me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And yet we say that. This country was built on people fleeing tyranny. They established a country of migrants or immigrants, a melting pot. And they established, and then we now say because the person was in office, well, no, we don't want everybody. And then people say, well, that's right, because legally, well, hold on, you keep tracing back roots of people here who've come. Everybody has that in their line, in their lineage, of someone made it here somehow. But we have orphaned 545 children, Pastor Evan.
You have to take a moment to kind of intake that. I remember when I had read that, the deep pain that I felt.
Yeah.
And both you and I are also, this is personal for us because we're both immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
We have an immigrant story. I came to this country at the age of 1 from Sudan. I know I've shared it a lot of times at FCBC, but I've also done a lot of work around immigration here in New York City.
Yeah.
At the height of the separation, I was actually in when the quote unquote caravan, that was what it was called. I was in Mexico. I took a couple of faith leaders down there to see firsthand sort of what we were doing as a country.
Yeah.
And to see the humanitarian crisis of families and children, thousands, by the thousands. I'm not even exaggerating. And I'm saying this because I witnessed this with my own eyes. Because to your point, if the media doesn't show it, we oftentimes don't truly understand the severity of these situations. But we had, as a country, we're putting children and families out on the street and out on the middle of the road by the hundreds. I mean, there was a soccer field full of families outside. Some of them didn't have clothes. Some of them had been in the same clothes for months, traveling long distances just to cross the border. And at some points, there were lots of parents who had given their kids, and people were coming with just like that, hundreds of just children. And at one point they had asked us if we could assist this organization in helping just the children cross the border. They'd asked faith leaders to come so that we could protect and shield the kids from the individuals from Homeland Security so that we could cross. Now they weren't crossing with their parents because their parents couldn't cross the border. So they were asking us to help cross these kids that we knew once they crossed, they were going to be put in cages. And once they're processed, they're put in cages. That time, once you cross the border, you don't just automatically go across. You get put in the middle of a cage. And oftentimes they were putting hundreds and thousands of people in one cage. So these are the things that the United States Homeland Security is doing. And I'm putting myself on blast because, they're probably listening and coming. But these are the reality of what was happening. And they were asking us to take kids over who didn't have parents, who had been separated from their parents, who had no connections. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. And then on this side, when I was here in New York City, I was doing work with a lot of families who it would be just the father and the kids. And I would say, where's the mother? And he'd say the mother is in a different state in detention. Because when we crossed the border, I was able to take the kids and she wasn't. And a lot of the times we had, and one of the other things that we did, Pastor Mike, was we would marry families. We would try to marry them because we wanted they could at least, if they showed the marriage certificate, because, the families were coming with just themselves and their 2 kids, but they didn't have proof that they were married and that these were their kids. So we at least would marry them in hopes that when they crossed the border, that they would let the entire family go instead of just separating the mother and the kids from the father. These are the things that we were trying to do to ensure that families could stay together when they crossed the border. And yet still, 500 children, over 500 children have now been separated. And as someone that's worked in the social services industry,
not just separated, they don't know where the parents
are. They don't even know where the parents are. Yes, please. And as someone that's worked in child welfare, if I was and I've separated kids from their families for reasons. It's never easy, even when you know you're making the right decision. As a social worker, it pained me to separate a child from their parents. And if the state of DC, the state of DC, who I was working for at that time, had lost a child and could not tell a parent where their child was, we would be sued for the, I mean, they could, it would be the crisis of like the world. I mean, you would hear it on every news station, would be the DC child welfare system has lost a child.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we use this language that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, and the hypocrisy in the practice of this administration compared to the language of our country is beyond grotesque. And you know, when I read that article, it pained me because I first saw it on TV and they passed it by and kept on moving on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to think about the trauma. Think about these children who will grow up as traumatized children and traumatized adults. Think about the pain, the deep existential wounds that have been inflicted upon these children. 545 children who do not know. I remember being a little boy, and I think we may have all had this experience, being in the mall with my mother. Mm-hmm. My mom told me to stay right here. Don't move. You stay right here. And I moved off. And I remember not knowing where she was. And I'm saying, mommy, mommy. And someone who worked at this department store came and got me. Eventually, my mother came, and my mother was so furious. But I get it. I was separated from my mother for 20 minutes and lost my mind. Imagine children who now maybe for the rest of their life may never see their parents again. And that is what this administration did. That is the pain that this administration inflicted with a zero tolerance policy. And at this moment, we have to have zero tolerance for this kind of inhumanity. And so, you know, we could talk on and on about this, but the point of these conversations that we have, and that's for those who are watching, is to just inform people of the things that are going on. We can't cover everything, but there's so many things that people of faith need to be made aware of. That when you think about what the policies of this administration, and then as we talked earlier, there are people, African Americans, and not just African Americans, a lot of people saying, well, on a clip today, well, we're not sure if we're going to vote yet. We're still not sure. And I said, you know, if you say that you're not sure as a person of color in this country, if you're going to vote, the question is, well, I can't tell you who to vote for, but the question becomes, what do you want this country to look like? This country that you are part of, what do you want this country to look like? Because if you say, I won't engage it, and then you say, I don't vote, and then say Donald Trump is reelected, the country the way it is right now, what it looks like, how it manifests itself, it's not like America was ever a utopia or perfect. But my God, what we've seen these past 4 years has been something we've never seen before. So another hot topic, this is our 6th hot topic, and it is something that came out. Pope Francis.
Yes.
In comments made in a documentary, the sitting Pope made comments and endorsed same-sex unions. And I have this specific comment he said here, I'm gonna read it. I didn't want to mess it up. He said, homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God. You can't kick someone out of a family nor make their life miserable for this. What we have to have is a civil union law. That way, they all will be legally covered. The Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, supported same-sex unions. And there were many gay Catholics who were excited, but there were many conservative Catholics, and not just Catholics, but Christians in general, who wanted some clarification. And I was amazed. No clarification was needed. The man was clear what he said, right? You know,
I just don't want to accept it. That's the problem. They don't want to accept it.
I genuinely fear for this Pope because, you know, we all know about the stories and the kind of tainted stories of the Vatican and all of that and the power plays, but this Pope is radical. But he's radical because he's seeking to be, as you said, use your language again, a decent human being. And radical, and I'm not equating this, but radical in the way Jesus was radical by honoring the inherent dignity of human beings, right? What do you think about what Pope Francis said this week?
I mean, listen, I know that the Catholic community and sort of the conservative community is probably confused right now. I'm curious, I think it's interesting because he used the word civil unions, right? So he still made the distinction between that the church wouldn't necessarily be the ones overseeing these unions, but it would be somehow that the federal government would be the ones to.
He was very strategic.
Right. He's very strategic. So he's like, look, the church doesn't have to do this, but and I thought that was an interesting distinction for him to make, because that was his way of, saying like, okay, the church doesn't have to do this, but this is my way of supporting. And in all honesty, I probably venture to say that he actually does believe in marriage, but he doesn't have the position and the ability to say that he does, which is, when you think about it, is very symbolic, sort of the church as a whole, and a lot of leaders who in many ways either believe him or don't believe like him, and can't, or feel as though they can't publicly make that statement.
He does have the power, but he also understands the ruptures that would take place in the church. And I think this is as close you could come to saying, we should be doing it. But for the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church worldwide, to say that he supports same-sex unions is a big deal, right? That is monumental, and very powerful. And this issue is one that will continue to fracture churches. The United Methodist Church right now, in the middle of moving into a split behind LGBTQ clergy and same-sex unions. And because and I went to United Methodist Seminary, in their book of discipline, it says that they do not ordain gay clergy. And there are many gay clergy within the United Methodist Church who've been fighting against this and still leading congregations and forming new communities. And so we're going to see a denominational split in the United Methodist Church. Again, we saw a split, centuries ago over slavery, and not just in the Methodist Church, but in the Baptist denomination. And so this issue around LGBTQ rights, behind same-sex marriages, has been an issue that will continue to rupture many churches, but in many ways, it's a necessary rupturing, because you can't honor life and honor love and then not honor life and love together, right? So,
I have a question to ask you? Do you think that this is going to sway? There are a lot of people who get swayed by their religious leaders. Do you think that there are some of those within the Catholic community who have been waiting for the Pope to change their decision? Do you think it's going to change their minds? Because it's different when the leader of the institution believes one thing, but if you can sway public opinion, do you think he's going to be able to sway public opinion?
I don't know. I think I think what he did is give cover to countless Catholics who are part of the LGBTQ community. I think he did that, and without saying it, he affirmed them. See, it's not necessarily, hey, we're going to go out and do same-sex marriages, right? That's what the Catholic Pope isn't saying. But he affirmed them. Now, there are people who say, well, that's not enough. Well, hold on now. Hold on. Everything is in increments and in phases. But for the Pope to affirm, what Pope? And it's not the first time he's affirmed members of the LGBTQ community. He's done that before. But to now affirm same-sex unions. So he has made two big moves during his papacy that are powerful. And the president, now, what we have to think about is when his papacy ends and the cardinals have to choose a new pope, the question is, will they choose someone as radical and progressive as Francis, or will they try to bring someone who will reel it back to the conservative end? And that's what time will tell. But right now, Pope Francis is living up to his name, Saint Francis, and really pushing the Catholic Church and the church worldwide to reimagine. He has critiqued capitalism. He has critiqued racism. He's critiqued the way capitalism has dominated this world and created poverty. I mean, he's been consistent. So the way he's been critiquing some of the social ills, it was only a matter of time before he stood out in support of LGBTQ members, and also this big move, which was to affirm and endorse same-sex unions. So a distinction, as you said, a great distinction. Similar to performing marriage ceremonies, but my God, it is a major move for the Catholic Church and for the Pope.
And I was thinking, you know, from my very limited memory from seminary, we learned about sort of the shifts that the Catholic Church has moved around Vatican I and Vatican II. And I think right now you're seeing a very unique shift that is probably coming and happening within the Catholic Church in a movement in sort of their belief system, their core values, and who they are. Mm-hmm. So, definitely this current Pope, I think, is leading that charge in sort of the new wave.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a movement to allow clergy to marry and go on. I will say this theologically, I've always been enamored by that, overwhelmed by that idea of clergy who cannot be married, right? When historically, when they think the Vatican is supposedly built on the bones of who they call the first Pope, which is Peter, St. Peter, right? And Peter was married. To me, that is always the thing that strikes me. The one who is viewed as the first Pope, that the Vatican is supposedly built on the bones of St. Peter, St. Peter's Basilica. I mean, you go on and on. Peter was married. Was married. So I've always been taken by that. I don't want this to be a theological conversation about Catholicism, but that has always struck me. But I think what the Pope is doing is opening up possibilities, not just around this issue, but many issues that have been a mark in the past of the conservatism of the Catholic Church, and now he's progressive. Well, we want to end tonight, those who are watching, with something that is Pastor Heaven really wanted to lead in and talk about, and we'll have this conversation. You know, one of the things that Donald Trump touted in the beginning of his presidency was the economy. And now, if you read some articles, he can no longer use that as the bedrock. I mean, in a 60 Minutes episode that has been getting a lot of attention and is going to air soon, the White House released it trying to do damage control before 60 Minutes aired it. And he said, in one of the comments he said that was released, that he spared the greatest economy of any other president in the history of this country. And she said, the interviewer said, "You don't believe that?" He said, "Absolutely." I mean, that's what you call making stuff up that Barack Obama alluded to. That he said it's the greatest economy. Think about what we're in right now, right? Before I let you loose on this time, I just want to hit people with some facts.
Come on, that's with the facts.
Yeah, there's some
facts are important. You have facts. You gotta always have facts.
You gotta have facts when you deal with this man, because here research was done. This is early research. This was research going to June. I'm gonna give you June statistics up until June and now. By June, 7.7 million workers lost their jobs because of the pandemic-induced recession, right? Now, here's what people don't think about. When we think about people who lost their jobs, the thing we don't think about are those dependents connected to the people who lost their jobs. 7 million workers who lost jobs by June of this year. 6.9 million of their dependents were affected, which meant that the total number affected by June was 14.7 million people were affected. Now, right now, 22 million jobs were lost. And if you almost, as the first statistic I gave you, if you make the loss comparable to the amount of dependents, that means that potentially 40, close to 44 million people in this country have been impacted by the loss of jobs. Now, of those 22 million jobs lost, only 42% have been recovered, and that's for the short term. Those short-term recoveries may not last. I.e., take the restaurant industry, for example, in New York City, where there are people who are able to get hired back when they did outdoor dining. What happens when that ends? So those jobs are temporary. Many jobs are temporary recoveries, not long-term recoveries. And this president said, this is the greatest economy in the history of this country. Think about that for a second. I want people to really think about this. the lives that have been impacted.
Yeah.
See, go back to what you said at the beginning of this. He says the greatest economy. I gave everyone some numbers, and then on the low, they're trying to pass the kill snap for people. Think about that. So here's the lie. Economy is great.
Mm-hmm.
He don't talk about the pandemic. Economy is great, and while we flourish in his false narrative, well, let's try to kill SNAP and get people off food stamps and stop taking care of people who can't take care of themselves, and people who lost their jobs and the families who are suffering. I mean, this is amazing.
You know, at one point I was, having a moment, and I just kept thinking to myself, because I made that same correlation to your point as I was reading over some of the statistics about our current economy and in relationship to this rule around SNAP. And I kept thinking, this individual is pure evil. I mean, if you could manifest or put in manifest like the essence of evil, like this is it. And we've seen it with our own eyes. We have witnessed it with our own eyes, and we will one day, hopefully, God willing, live to tell the story to our children.
But remember this. Let me go churchy for a second.
What's that?
Because what we have to remember in this country, because it is easy to look at Donald Trump, and as you just said, and be like, oh, this man is evil. Oh my God, when he's gone. Now, Paul reminds us, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but the principalities and powers. Right? He calls spiritual wickedness in high places. So Trump is not the creator. He's a manifestation of a crisis,
right,
that is shaped by evil, not just systemic racism, systemic evil. He's one manifestation, but guess what? He's one. They're countless. Mm-hmm. And what I shared with you in our conversation earlier, and I want people to hear this. We're having these conversations right now leading up to the election, as we say, empowering conversations. But always remember this. Remember this. That right now, when you look at the polls, and we know what polls mean because we saw 16 polls were inaccurate. Right now, the polls say, that a statistical dead heat. Some polls have Joe Biden leading nationally by 5, 6, 7. But I want people to understand that half of the country believe in Donald Trump. Half of the country believes in Donald Trump. Think about the things we just talked about briefly tonight. And half of the country believes in this president. We have a deeper crisis. He's just one manifestation, representation of many people who believe in what he's doing.
Or I would probably even venture to say believe in what he represents.
Believe in what he represents. Yes, that's a better.
They are embedded in what he represents, which earlier, which was white supremacy, which is really at the core of it is really white supremacy, because a lot of the language that he uses and affirms his base is really racist rhetoric. And I want to add another statistic as we're getting ready to close, particularly as it relates to the Black community for the economy in this moment. And this was the beginning of the pandemic. I had read an article that had said that the current Black unemployment rate was at 16.8%. This is the beginning of the pandemic, which was the highest rate of unemployment for the Black community in more than a decade. While unemployment rate for whites only fell to 12.4%.
This is at the beginning of the pandemic.
This is only at the beginning. This was not, I remember, because this was an article from MSNBC, and I took down these notes because I was shook as to the stark difference. And like I said, at the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of the articles that I've been reading have been saying, and statistics have been showing that women and children have been hit the hardest because their industries have been gutted. And as you mentioned earlier, there are industries that are never coming back. People who have worked their entire life to try to get towards a particular career path, who have in a matter of a day, it was literally a day, Pastor Mike, lost their entire identity as a person.
Listen, in July, we replayed some of the Journey episodes, and I can say this because it was aired. And one of my interviews was with Marcus Samuelson, who owns Red Rooster and many other restaurants in Canada and other parts of the world. And in the post-interview check-in that we were doing, he said something that just rocked me. He said, Pastor, it took me 25 years to build my businesses and 10 days to lose it all. Think about that. he was a restaurateur, world renowned, and the pandemic hit him. Think about those who didn't have the kind of underpinning and they had the financial resource and support. And so we suffered, as you said, Black people suffered tremendously from the COVID pandemic and the economic pandemic that took root. The jobs in New York City alone, the hospitality and leisure industry, a major hit. The restaurant industry, there are restaurants that are permanently closed and never coming back. So those are jobs permanently.
To put it out there, like, you know, my mom has been out of work since the beginning of the pandemic. She works in the hotel industry and has not gone back to work yet. It's just March. She's been at home since the beginning. This is someone who worked 40 hours a week in the hotel industry and has not been in work since the day of the first day that first week when the pandemic got in March.
Wow. Yeah. So it's personal. Yeah. And the countless stories that people have, we all have of family members and friends who suffered in this moment because of this season. But always remember this, it's not just the obvious. I always tell people, don't get caught up in the superficial issues. There are deeper issues that really surround and shape the ones we find put on the media and put on the news cycle. But in our work, and I think some of the work in this season with this Empowering Conversations, is to help people become aware of what is taking place beyond the obvious. To say, well, Trump is horrible based on what he says on TV. But no, based also on the policy, the number of right-wing conservative judges he's appointed to the bench, the Supreme Court that is going to change because the vote for Amy Barrett is going to be on Monday, I believe they said. The just show how powerless the Democrats are. The Democrats boycotted today, but their boycott still couldn't stop because the Republicans had the votes. She is going in. This is going to be part of our conversation next week. She is going to be on the Supreme Court, which means the Supreme Court will be 6-3 conservative. It's not just the fact this man is racist, that he's misogynistic, that he's xenophobic. I mean, it's what he has been doing while he's used those things as a distraction. The policies that have been inflicted and instituted, the people that have been damaged, the children that have been orphaned. This is why these conversations are necessary. It is our role to try to awaken the conscience today, right now, so people can make informed decisions and be educated about what's happened. And then, as we said, we educate, we empower, and then it becomes a responsibility of us who now have the education empowerment to engage. So I'm gonna let you have the final words tonight, Pastor Heaven, with regard to the topics.
Yeah, so, just in complete alignment of what you just said, Pastor Mike, we really have to remain vigilant and informed. And I kept thinking, just as you were talking, the amount of just the topics that we talk about, we see hot topics all the time for different, social issues around different celebrities, but hot topics around political issues that are actually impacting our lives, that one, help us to become informed, and two, to really realize the many different systems that we often don't realize that directly impact us. When we make statements like voting doesn't matter, right? And the conversations that we're having, we're clearly showing you just how important your vote really does matter, beyond just the president, that a president can make tons of decisions that can drastically and negatively impact your life. And so we want to make sure in this election that we're choosing a leader that will be thinking about the people first. Yeah. And as you're making your decision in this upcoming election, just beyond thinking about yourself, think about your neighbor. Everything that we mentioned today about the
bigger than you.
Bigger than you. So maybe you're not the individual that will lose your SNAP. Maybe you weren't impacted by President Trump's immigration policies. Maybe these things that we talked about today don't necessarily directly impact you. But if you begin to think about not just yourself, but your neighbor and how these issues have been impacting our neighbors, that love, that radical sense of love, I think is what will take us over and will, hopefully take us on a new dawn for a new day. Yeah.
I want to say, I just saw somebody made a comment. I'll say this, and I ditto to what Pastor Heaven just said and well said. Yes, we've been talking about the presidential elections, and we've not been doing this negation of local elections. The famous saying that all politics are local is real. So our local municipalities, our state offices are critical. And there's many people who have said in the past, well, you know what? Our local elections and our state elections are more important than federal elections. And I had agreed, and I would agree with that. And I agreed with that wholeheartedly until 2017. Because what we saw is, yes, local politics is crucially important. We have to engage that. I'm never going to say no. But what we have seen is what happens when someone who's not a decent human being, who is a pathological narcissist, who doesn't have an empathetic bone in his body, who does not care about what we call the least of these, takes office, who does not care about truth or facts, who runs roughshod over democracy and decency. This is what happens when the wrong person has power bestowed upon him by the state.
And actually, if we can just add one more thing, because there was a question that we had from last week. We did offer up an opportunity.
Oh, yes.
Actually really kind of goes in alignment with what you just mentioned around.
Oh, tell everybody so tell them what we do in terms of questions. So
yes. So if you have questions, you can send your questions in to myself at hberhane@fcbcnyc.org.
Because we don't have the lower third tonight. So spell it out for
H Berhane, so BERHANE at FCBCNYC.org. And then we will bring your questions to the conversation and we'll have a chance and take a stab at answering them. Yeah. So last week we mentioned that, and this week we actually got a submission for a question. So before we close, I want to make sure that we uplift this question and are able to answer it for our fellow audience members. So the question is, I'm battling with a defeatist attitude that he will win another 4-year term, he being Trump. And these past 4 years have been difficult. Don't we all know? And I don't know how I would handle another 4 years. Do you have any insight, Pastor Mike, and I can share as well, to for this audience member and as well for this country on how we would possibly get through it if we were to unfortunately have another 4-year presidency with Trump?
Well, this is a perfect way to close tonight's segment. On the Sunday after the election, I said from the pulpit that Donald Trump was not the first bigoted, misogynistic, narcissistic, racist to occupy the White House. And we have survived those who've come before, as brutal as their leadership and presidencies were, and we will survive this. I do not have a defeatist attitude, and I encourage the one who raised questions to not have it. We come from a stock of people who have survived the most inhumane and brutal system in the history of this world, and we're still here. Our presence, my presence, your presence, Pastor Heaven, the presence of those who are watching, is because someone with our DNA, someone who looked like us, survived the most inhumane, brutal treatment that allowed us to survive and live. If we've come through the dark night, the centuries-long night of slavery, 4 years of Donald Trump, or even 8 years, will not put fear in my spirit, should not cause us to have a defeatist attitude, right? My faith is still in God, and my faith is still in the righteousness and justice of the universe, that the arc of the universe still bends towards justice. I believe that. I don't believe he will get reelected, but if he does, that means we become more vigilant, more resolute, and more committed for the path to justice and righteousness. But don't be defeated. Our God is too big, and our past is too strong, and our ancestors are depending on our courage and our confidence in this moment. And so be encouraged, my friend, whoever you are, be encouraged, because not just the ancestors, but you are here because you have that survivor's DNA. And if we have survived the tribulations and the challenges of just being Black in America, we can survive one more racist in power. So I'll say that.
That's a great way to close it out, Pastor Mike.
Well, listen, thank you all for zooming in, checking us out tonight. I'm grateful, as always, for Pastor Heaven and all the gifts she brings to FCBC and even to these conversations. She always makes me look good. I appreciate that. And just completely thankful for all of you. And our next empowering conversation next week will be next Thursday at 7. And then we're going to do something special on election night, our version FCBC election night recap. And so join us again next Thursday at 7 p.m. for another empowering conversation with myself, Pastor Mike, and
Pastor Heaven.
There you go. And we'll see you all next week, family. Until next time, peace and many blessings. Take care.